One night, a kind kitchen worker loses her job, a convoy blocks the alley, and a red laser dot crawls up the brick. Pop! Someone wants the old man dead. The boss slips her a black card. Answer when I call. Safety comes with a price. Doors lock, engines roar, and she's carried into a world of guards, rules, and eyes that never blink. But the real danger isn't outside. Inside, someone plants evidence with her name on it, turning kindness into a trap. A gala turns to gunfire, a countdown starts in a dark warehouse, and the coldest man in the city puts his body between her and a bullet. He'll burn the city to save her, but who framed her, and why the old man? When power demands blood, who do you trust? The devil who protects you, or the truth that could kill you? The night air carried the sharp bite of early winter as Ivy stood frozen in the alley, her fingers trembling around the sleek black card. The remnants of adrenaline coursed through her veins, her mind replaying the chaos that had erupted in mere minutes. The warmth of the takeout container, the grateful look in the homeless man's eyes, Mr. Hale's rage, it all felt distant now, overshadowed by gunfire and the mysterious man named Valerio. She traced her thumb over the card's edge, its surface smooth and expensive, devoid of any text or markings. Just like its owner, it revealed nothing while commanding attention. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, pushing her into action. With shaking hands, she tucked the card into her coat pocket and hurried toward the street, her work shoes clicking against the wet pavement. The bitter irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She'd lost her job trying to help someone, only to discover that someone was connected to whatever dangerous world had brought gunfire to a hotel alley. The memory of Valerio's face, sharp cheekbones, calculating dark eyes, and that flash of raw emotion when he'd said, "Dad," haunted her thoughts. As she walked, the cold air stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced with questions. Who would want to shoot at them? Why was a wealthy man's father living on the streets? The contrast between Valerio's immaculate suit and his father's worn layers of clothes spoke of a story she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Reaching the bus stop, Ivy sank onto the metal bench, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was jobless, her rent was due in 2 weeks, and she had somehow gotten tangled in something that involved men in expensive suits and bullets. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. It was a text from her roommate, Sarah. "You okay? Heard sirens near the hotel." Ivy's fingers hovered over the keyboard. How could she possibly explain what had happened? "Lost my job. Tell you when I get home," she typed back, keeping it simple. The city lights blurred through the bus window as she headed home, each street corner taking her further from the upscale hotel district. Her small apartment waited in a neighborhood where the buildings were older, the restaurants more modest, and the dreams a little more worn around the edges, like the dreams she'd had of becoming a pastry chef at a luxury hotel. She pulled out the black card again, studying it under the fluorescent bus lights. In all her years of working service jobs to support herself after her mother's death, she'd never encountered anyone like Valerio. The way he'd taken control of the situation with just his presence, how his men moved with military precision at the first sign of danger. It spoke of power she'd only seen in movies. The bus lurched to a stop, and Ivy clutched her bag closer. A young mother struggled aboard with a sleeping toddler, fumbling with her fare. Without hesitation, Ivy pulled out her spare bus pass and offered it to the woman, who accepted with grateful eyes. Even after everything that had happened, she couldn't stop herself from helping. It was as natural as breathing, this instinct to ease others' burdens. Her mother used to say she had a heart too big for her own good. Tonight had proved that trait could be dangerous. As the bus continued its route, Ivy's thoughts returned to the homeless man, Valerio's father. She remembered how he'd always thanked her with dignity, his voice carrying the traces of education and refinement despite his circumstances. Now she understood why. What had happened to put him on the streets while his son commanded luxury cars and armed men? The card in her pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. Valerio had said to answer when he called, not if. The certainty in his voice suggested he was used to people following his commands without question. But Ivy had spent years building her independence, working multiple jobs, taking night classes, saving every extra dollar. The thought of being at someone else's beck and call made her stomach clench. Yet she couldn't deny the pull of curiosity or the lingering warmth of approval in Valerio's eyes when she'd defended her actions. He could have let security drag her away, but instead, he'd listened. In that moment of chaos, he'd seen her. Really seen her. The bus turned onto her street and Ivy pulled the cord for her stop. As she walked the final block home, she noticed how the shadows seemed deeper tonight, how every unexpected sound made her pulse quicken. The world felt different now. as if that black card had opened her eyes to an alternate version of the city she thought she knew. Outside her apartment building, she paused to look up at the night sky, barely visible between the buildings. The stars were hidden behind clouds and city lights, just as the truth about Valerio and his father was hidden behind layers of mystery and danger. But unlike the stars, she had a feeling those truths would soon come to light, whether she was ready for them or not. Her keys jingled in the lock as she thought about what she'd tell Sarah. How do you explain that one act of kindness had connected her to a world of black cars, hidden weapons, and men who carried power like a second skin? She didn't even understand it herself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hotel's polished marble floors as Ivy stood outside Mr. Hale's office. Her stomach churned with each tick of the hallway clock. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette moving behind the desk, making her wait deliberately. She smoothed her blazer, the only professional piece in her wardrobe, and tried to steady her breathing. When he finally called her in, his face wore the smug expression of someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. "Miss Hart, come to beg for your job back?" "Yes, sir." The words tasted bitter. "I know what I did was against policy, but—" "Against policy?" He leaned back, spreading his hands across the mahogany desk. "You stole from this establishment to feed vagrants. Do you know how that looks for our image? This isn't some downtown diner." Ivy's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "The food was being thrown out, Mr. Hale. I didn't—" "Charity cases don't pay rent, Miss Hart." His lip curled. "And neither will you once I'm done. One call from me, and you won't get hired to wash dishes in this city, let alone work as a pastry chef." The threat hit her like ice water. Without references, her career would be over before it began. She'd end up back in convenience stores and coffee shops, watching her dreams of becoming a real pastry chef dissolve like sugar in rain. "Please," she said, hating how her voice shook. "I'll do anything." The office door burst open. Mr. Romano, the restaurant owner, rushed in with sweat beading his forehead. His usually pristine suit was rumpled, his tie askew. "Hale," he barked, "pack your things. You're being reassigned effective immediately." Mr. Hale's face drained of color. "What? But I—" "Now." Romano's voice cracked like a whip. As Hale stumbled out, Romano turned to Ivy with an unsettling mix of fear and forced cheerfulness. "Miss Hart, please accept our sincerest apologies for last night's misunderstanding. We'd like to offer you your position back, with a promotion to assistant pastry lead, effective immediately." Ivy's mind spun. Assistant pastry lead? The position hadn't even existed yesterday. "I don't understand." "Your salary will increase accordingly, of course." Romano's smile was brittle. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to address the staff about these changes." The hastily arranged pre-service meeting buzzed with speculation. Ivy sat in the back, her phone burning a hole in her pocket. She kept checking it, unable to focus on Romano's nervous speech about exciting changes and restructuring. Her screen lit up with a message from a blocked number. "He's safe for now. Tell no one." Her breath caught. Valerio's father. The man she'd been feeding for weeks, never knowing he was someone's missing parent. What kind of situation had she stumbled into? The rest of her shift passed in a blur of sugar and steam. She threw herself into work, grateful that muscle memory could take over while her mind churned with questions. The other staff whispered about Hale's sudden departure, but no one dared ask her what had happened. When the last customer left and the kitchen gleamed with post-service cleaning, Ivy found herself drawn to the back alley. The security camera that had caught her stealing now hung limply from its mount, its lens shattered. The familiar cardboard bed was gone. Only damp pavement remained where the old man had slept. Her eyes traced up the brick wall to where the bullet had struck, leaving a scorched crescent like a dark moon. Someone had tried to kill him, or Valerio, right here where she'd been standing. The sound of a car engine purred behind her. A black sedan rolled to a stop, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. The back window lowered with an electric hum, revealing Valerio's sharp features softened by shadows. "Get in," he said, his voice as smooth and dark as coffee. "We need to talk about last night." Ivy stood frozen, studying him. In daylight, his suit probably cost more than her yearly rent. Even in darkness, power radiated from him like heat from an oven. This was the man who had apparently orchestrated her promotion with a single phone call, who commanded armed men and bulletproof cars. The same man whose father she'd been feeding soup and day-old bread, never knowing she was helping someone so important. Someone dangerous enough to have enemies with guns. The open car door waited like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. Ivy thought of her mother's warnings about strange men in nice cars, about deals that seemed too good to be true. But she also remembered the dignified way Valerio's father had always thanked her, and the flash of raw emotion she'd seen in Valerio's eyes when he'd recognized him. A horn blared in the distance, making her jump. The city continued its nighttime rhythm around them, oblivious to this moment that felt suspended between two worlds, her simple life of ovens and recipes, and whatever shadowy realm Valerio inhabited. The leather seat creaked as Ivy settled into the sedan, her heart drumming against her ribs. The city slid past in a blur of neon and shadows, while Valerio studied her with eyes that missed nothing. "The man you've been helping," he began, his voice controlled but taut with emotion, "is Giorgio Moretti, my father." Ivy's fingers twisted in her lap. "He never told me his name." "He wouldn't have." Valerio's gaze shifted to the passing streets. "He disappeared 5 years ago, under complicated circumstances. Dangerous ones." The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why would someone with your kind of power live on the streets?" Valerio's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. "Because power costs what it costs." His words fell like stones into still water. "Sometimes the price is everything you have." He leaned forward, intensity crackling around him. "Tell me everything. What did he say to you? Did you notice anyone following him? The laser sight, did you see it before the shot?" Ivy closed her eyes, remembering. "He never said much. Just thank you, mostly, but with such dignity, like he was bestowing something on me instead of the other way around." She opened her eyes to find Valerio watching her intently. His hands used to shake badly, but they steadied after eating. "No one followed that I saw, and I only noticed the red dot when your man pointed it out." The car pulled up to a brick building with a cross mounted above the door. A sign read, "St. Michael's Shelter for the Homeless." Valerio guided her inside with a hand hovering near her elbow, not quite touching. The interior smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. A volunteer at the desk nodded to Valerio like they'd been expecting him. They walked past rows of cots until they reached a curtained-off section in the back. Giorgio lay curled on his side, tremors running through his thin frame. Up close, without the darkness hiding him, Ivy could see the marks of his suffering. Old scars peeked through torn sleeves, yellowing bruises, the trembling that spoke of more than just cold. A nurse appeared with supplies, her shoes squeaking on linoleum. Ivy knelt beside the cot, muscle memory from years of caring for her sick mother taking over. "The soup will be ready in just a moment," she murmured, the familiar words coming naturally. "Your son is here." Giorgio's eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain, but aware. A weak smile curved his cracked lips as he pointed a shaking finger at Ivy. "Her," he rasped, looking at Valerio. "I trust her." Valerio's phone buzzed. His face hardened as he looked at the screen. A photo of the shelter's sign with 2 words beneath it. "Tick-tock." "They found us," he said, voice clipped. He made a sharp gesture, and men materialized from the shadows. "We're leaving. Now!" "No," Giorgio protested weakly, clutching Ivy's hand. "Not without her. She fed me. No price. No questions." Valerio's expression shifted through a rapid calculation. "Miss Hart will come with us," he decided, as if her presence in this scene had been inevitable from the start. "It's not safe for her here anyway." Everything happened in efficient blur after that. Giorgio was carefully transferred to a wheelchair. Someone draped a blanket over his shoulders. Ivy found herself guided through back corridors and out a service entrance, where 3 black SUVs idled. The middle vehicle's door opened, and Ivy was helped inside, next to Giorgio. The locks engaged with heavy clicks that seemed to seal her fate. As their convoy pulled away, she glimpsed the shelter's security camera, its red light blinking steadily in the growing distance. Giorgio's trembling hand found hers in the darkness. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the way her whole life had tilted sideways in 24 hours, she squeezed back. His fingers were warmer now than they'd been in the alley, but they still shook with withdrawal and fear. Valerio sat across from them, phone to his ear, issuing rapid instructions in what sounded like Italian. The streetlights painted stripes across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the careful way he watched his father. Their driver took a series of random turns, doubling back occasionally, making sure they weren't followed. Other cars in their convoy did the same, creating a confusing pattern of black vehicles moving through the night like a deadly chess game. Ivy watched the city she knew fade into unfamiliar territories. Everything familiar, her apartment, her job, her carefully planned future, receded with each mile. The weight of Giorgio's trust pressed against her chest like a warm stone. Whatever she'd stumbled into by sharing food with a homeless man had transformed into something bigger than herself. The tremors racking Giorgio's body grew stronger. Ivy shifted closer, letting him lean against her shoulder. His breath came in shallow gasps, but his grip on her hand remained steady, as if she were an anchor in a storm he'd been weathering alone for far too long. Valerio ended his call and watched this tableau with unreadable eyes. The power that radiated from him seemed to fill the vehicle's interior, but there was something else there too. A son watching his father suffer, a man carrying weights no one could see. The city continued to scroll past their windows like a film reel spinning into unknown territory. Ivy felt the precise moment when they crossed some invisible boundary between her old life and whatever waited ahead. Giorgio's breathing eventually steadied against her shoulder, his trust a mantle she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. The convoy wound through dense forest before emerging at a sprawling lakeside estate just as pre-dawn light began seeping through the trees. Fog clung to perfectly trimmed hedges like cotton candy, creating ghostly shapes in the dim light. Armed men stationed at intervals along the property line nodded as the vehicles passed through wrought iron gates. Ivy watched through tinted windows as they pulled up to a 3-story mansion of stone and glass. The morning air bit sharp and cold when she stepped out, her breath forming little clouds. Giorgio leaned heavily on both her and Valerio as they helped him inside. The house interior hit her with the sterile smell of antiseptic, layered over polished wood and leather. Everything gleamed with wealth and precision, from the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers. A man in surgical scrubs waited in what looked like a converted study, medical equipment arranged on antique furniture. "The kitchen is through there," Valerio directed as his men helped Giorgio onto an examination table. "Make yourself useful." Ivy found her way to a kitchen that would make any chef weep, all stainless steel and granite, with copper pots hanging like art pieces. As she prepared tea, her eyes tracked everything: security cameras in each corner, reinforced windows, the steady rhythm of guard rotations passing by. She cataloged it all like ingredients in a complex recipe. The kettle whistled just as Valerio entered. "We need to establish parameter," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "For the next 48 hours, no one leaves. All communications are monitored. This is the safest place for my father to stabilize." "That's not your choice alone," Ivy countered, squaring her shoulders. "Giorgio needs proper nutrition, warmth, and the right to refuse treatment if he wants. You can't just lock him up and force-feed him pills." Something flickered across Valerio's face. Surprise, maybe respect. "What do you propose?" "I keep my phone. I set meal times based on what his system can handle, and I get veto power if any medication causes severe side effects." She met his gaze steadily. "He trusts me. Don't make him regret that." Valerio studied her for a long moment before extending his hand. Agreed. When their palms met, something electric shot up both their arms. Ivy pulled back quickly, trying to ignore how warm his skin had felt against hers. The sun finally crested the lake, sending golden light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ivy busied herself preparing a light breakfast: soft scrambled eggs, buttered toast cut into triangles, more tea with honey. Giorgio sat at the kitchen island, wrapped in a thick robe, watching her work with tired but clear eyes. "Thank you," he murmured as she set the plate before him. His hands shook less as he lifted the fork. Valerio leaned against the counter, his own tea untouched, gaze shifting between Ivy and his father. The morning quiet felt almost peaceful, until a sharp crack split the air. Glass shattered somewhere upstairs. Alarms began screaming as men shouted commands outside. Before Ivy could process what was happening, Valerio slammed into her, pressing her against the kitchen island as his body covered hers. "Lock it down!" he roared. "Now!" Metal shutters rolled down over windows with mechanical whirs. Guards swarmed in, surrounding Giorgio. Through it all, Ivy remained frozen, feeling Valerio's heart hammering against her back, his breath hot on her neck as chaos erupted around them. She could see the master bedroom window from the kitchen. Its remains sparkled like deadly diamonds on the unused bed below. A single bullet had found its way through their fortress, a reminder that no place was truly safe. Valerio's hands gripped her waist, keeping her still as reports flooded in through earpieces. She could feel the tension radiating through his body, the careful way he positioned himself between her and any potential threat. His cologne wrapped around her, sandalwood, and something darker, making it hard to focus. Giorgio remained oddly calm in his seat, methodically finishing his eggs as if bullets through windows were a normal breakfast occurrence. But Ivy noticed his hands had started trembling again, fine tremors that made the teacup rattle against its saucer. "Status!" Valerio demanded, still not releasing Ivy. "Perimeter breach on the east side," a guard reported. "No visual on the shooter. Teams are sweeping the woods now." "Check the boathouse," Giorgio suggested quietly. "There's an old tunnel." "You remember?" Valerio's voice held something raw. "I built this place," Giorgio replied, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "I remember everything." Teams of black-clad security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, checking every corner, every shadow. Ivy watched it all through the gaps between Valerio's arms, still caged against the counter. She could feel each breath he took, the subtle shifts of muscle as he tracked movement around them. The morning sun continued its climb, now blocked by metal shutters that turned the kitchen into a bunker. The alarms finally silenced, leaving behind a ringing in Ivy's ears and the murmur of radio chatter. She became acutely aware of how close Valerio stood, how his body heat seeped through her clothes, how his fingers still pressed into her hips. Giorgio set down his empty teacup with a quiet clink. "Perhaps," he said mildly, "we should discuss why someone wants me dead badly enough to track us here." The morning crawled by in a haze of tactical movements and hushed conversations. Behind the sealed metal shutters, the safe house felt like a submarine, cut off from natural light. Ivy stayed close to Giorgio, who seemed to draw strength from her presence. "Tell me about your work," he requested, hands wrapped around another cup of tea. "The hotel must have interesting stories." Ivy settled beside him, grateful for the distraction. "Well, there was the time a wedding cake almost ended in disaster. The bride wanted 6 tiers of red velvet with sugar flowers." She wove tales of kitchen mishaps and last-minute saves while upstairs, the doctor methodically collected glass shards from the master bed. Each crystal piece clinked into a metal pan like expensive wind chimes. Giorgio listened intently, occasionally chuckling at her descriptions of demanding guests and creative solutions. When Valerio returned, his rage was evident in the rigid set of his shoulders and the careful precision of his movements. He wore it like an expensive coat, tailored to contain, not reveal. "The shot came from the eastern ridge," he reported, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Professional work, testing our response time, our weak points." His hand brushed the grip of his concealed weapon. "We moved to the main estate. It's fortified, multiple layers of security, better sight lines." Giorgio's head began shaking before Valerio finished. "No, too many ghosts." "Dad," Valerio's voice carried an edge of desperation. "We can't protect you here." Ivy touched Giorgio's arm. Gently. "I'll come too," she said, her voice soft but certain. "We'll set up a proper meal schedule, get you stronger." She met his uncertain gaze. "I promise." Something eased in Giorgio's expression. He covered her hand with his weathered one and nodded. The convoy assembled with military efficiency. By late afternoon, they passed through towering iron gates into a world of old money and calculated intimidation. The estate sprawled across manicured grounds, winter gardens standing sentinel alongside what Ivy recognized as cleverly disguised shooting ranges. Armed guards patrolled in regular patterns, their black uniforms blending with lengthening shadows. A butler, because of course there was a butler, showed Ivy to a guest suite that probably cost more than her annual salary. The room connected to Giorgio's through a shared sitting area, positioning her perfectly for both care and containment. Within an hour, staff wheeled in a professional pastry cart stocked with premium ingredients. "The kitchen has been briefed on your requirements," the butler informed her. "Please let us know if you need anything else." Ivy ran her fingers over silky flour and French butter, finding comfort in these familiar tools. At least here she could be useful. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that screamed old-world power. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across dark wainscoting while portraits of stern-faced men watched from gilt frames. But it was the empty chair at the head of the table that drew Ivy's attention. Valerio didn't sit. He ate standing, moving between windows with predatory grace, checking angles and exits. His pasta grew cold as he prowled, shoulders tight with unspent energy. "The head seat," he said later, catching her studying the vacant space. "It belonged to my uncle. He vanished the same time my father did." His jaw worked. Convenient timing. Night settled over the estate like a heavy blanket. Ivy lay in her oversized bed, listening to the symphony of security measures. Radios crackling, guards changing shifts, motion sensors clicking as something triggered them outside her window. The oaks lining the drive creaked in the wind, their branches scraping against stone like skeletal fingers. From somewhere below came the rhythmic sounds of combat. Swift footwork, the impact of fists on training bags. Valerio working out his frustrations in the basement gym. The tempo of his strikes matched her heartbeat. Ivy traced the elaborate plasterwork on the ceiling, mind spinning. In just 2 days, she'd gone from feeding a homeless man to being caught in what felt like a mafia war. The strange thing was, she wasn't as scared as she should be. Concerned, yes. Wary? Absolutely. But not terrified. Perhaps it was Giorgio's quiet dignity that anchored her, or the way Valerio's control cracked when he looked at his father. Even surrounded by wealth and weapons, they were still just a family trying to heal old wounds. A particularly loud gust rattled her windows. The motion sensor clicked again, its red light blinking steadily. Below, Valerio's workout continued, jab, cross, hook, each strike echoing through the foundations of his ancestral home. Ivy rolled onto her side, wondering what ghosts Giorgio feared in these halls, what memories lurked behind those empty portraits. The weight of unasked questions pressed against her chest. Who wanted Giorgio dead? Why had he chosen homelessness over this fortress? What had his brother, Valerio's uncle, done to fracture everything? She could hear the answers circling like wolves in the dark, patient and hungry. Another click from the sensor. Another rush of wind. Another series of strikes from below. Ivy pulled the silk duvet higher, creating a cocoon of borrowed luxury. Tomorrow she would start rebuilding Giorgio's strength through carefully planned meals. It was what she knew, what she could control in this uncertain new world. The sound of Valerio's training session finally ceased. Footsteps moved through the house, guards doing their rounds, staff preparing for tomorrow, a family trying to outrun its past. Ivy closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the security checks lull her. Whatever came next, she had made her choice when she promised Giorgio she'd stay. Now she just had to live with the consequences. Dawn crept over the estate as Ivy navigated the industrial kitchen. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, measuring flour and activating yeast for brioche. The familiar motions centered her, even in this unfamiliar space. Steam rose from the French press as she brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, or at least encourage the living. The kitchen staff watched her warily at first, this outsider in their domain. But the scent of fresh bread worked its magic, and soon they moved around her with cautious acceptance. She caught fragments of whispered Italian between them, noting how they relaxed when she shared newly baked rolls. Balancing a laden tray, Ivy climbed the grand staircase. The morning light filtered through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across Persian carpets. 2 guards nodded as she approached Giorgio's room, their weapons discreet but present. She paused in the doorway, struck by the tableau before her. Valerio sat beside his father's bed, head bowed over what looked like a worn prayer card. His customary mask of control had slipped, revealing something raw and young in his expression. For a moment, she glimpsed the sun beneath the soldier. He sensed her presence and straightened, walls snapping back into place. But when she set down the tray, his "thank you" carried an unfamiliar softness that caught at the edges. George's eyes lit up at the sight of fresh brioche. "You spoil an old man," he said, tearing into the warm bread. Mid-morning sun had just touched the gardens when alarms shattered the peace. A security breach at the outer fence sent the estate into controlled chaos. Radios crackled, with tactical chatter as Valerio's men moved with practiced precision. Ivy watched from an upstairs window as Valerio took command. His presence filled the courtyard. Spine straight, chin lifted, voice carrying clear instructions across the grounds. When the threat assessment came back, he physically positioned himself between the danger and his father's wing of the house, a shield made of flesh and fierce intention. The all clear came 30 minutes later, a probe, testing their defenses. Ivy released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She found Giorgio unsettled by the commotion, hands trembling slightly. Without comment, she helped him to the attached bathroom for a warm soak. As she washed his thin shoulders, she shared stories about kitchen disasters. The time she'd accidentally doubled the salt in a wedding cake. The great caramel explosion that took 3 days to clean up. "The bride actually cried," Ivy said, working shampoo through his silver hair, until she tasted the backup cake and declared it was fate because she'd been on a diet anyway. Giorgio's chuckle was rusty but real. Each small laugh felt like a victory, another step away from the man who'd huddled in that alley. Late afternoon found Ivy back in the kitchen, kneading dough to settle her nerves. Valerio appeared like a shadow in the doorway, a leather folder tucked under one arm. His presence sent the staff scattering. "We need to formalize your position," he said, laying out a contract. 30 days initial term with hazard pay that made her eyes widen. Full protection detail, unrestricted access to Giorgio, medical benefits that would make her former employer weep. In exchange, absolute discretion and compliance with security protocols. Ivy read every line carefully, aware of Valerio watching her with those intense eyes. "I have conditions," she said finally, his eyebrow lifted. "Do you?" "Complete autonomy in my work. No interference with Giorgio's meal plans or daily routine unless medically necessary." She met his gaze steadily. "And I won't comply with any demand that compromises his dignity. He's not a prisoner or an invalid. He's your father." Something flickered across Valerio's face. Surprise? Respect? Perhaps both. "Agreed," he said, and she could have sworn she saw the ghost of a smile. They signed together, hands brushing as they passed the heavy fountain pen back and forth. Ivy's signature looked small next to his bold strokes. The first snowflakes of winter drifted past the windows as she headed back upstairs. The estate felt different now. Not quite home, but no longer entirely foreign. Giorgio looked up from his book as she entered, pleasure warming his tired face. Through the window, she watched the snow beginning to dust the grounds white, transforming the defensive perimeter into something almost magical. The guards continued their rounds, dark figures moving through the gathering dusk. Somewhere in the house, Valerio would be reviewing security footage, planning, protecting. But here in this room, with Giorgio's steady breathing and the soft fall of snow, Ivy found a pocket of peace in this dangerous new world. Steam rose from the winter garden's glass walls as Ivy wandered between the neat rows of dormant plants. After the day's intensity, she needed space to breathe. The humid air clung to her skin as she traced her fingers along damp leaves, memorizing the path through this maze of greenery. A rhythmic thudding drew her attention to a corner of the garden that had been converted into a makeshift gym. Through the fogged glass, she made out Valerio's silhouette, shoulders bare as he worked a heavy bag. His knuckles flashed white with each hit. Wrap, unwrap, like some private ritual of penance. He must have sensed her presence because he stilled, turning slightly. "You should be resting," he said, voice rough from exertion. "So should you." Ivy moved closer, noting the tension in his jaw. "But I guess neither of us is very good at that." Valerio unwound the wraps from his hands, methodical even in this. "I spent years not knowing if he was alive." The confession came out like he was forcing each word through gravel. Every shadow, every unidentified body, every whisper. "I built this whole damn kingdom so nothing could ever be taken from me again." The raw honesty in his voice made something in Ivy's chest ache. She watched him ball up the wraps, knuckles red and swollen. "Protection can become a cage if you lock every door," she said softly. "Even fortresses need windows." He moved closer, close enough that his body heat fogged the glass behind her. For one suspended breath, they stood in that humid space between safety and danger, neither retreating. His phone shattered the moment. Valerio answered with clipped efficiency, his expression shifting as he listened. When he hung up, calculation had replaced vulnerability. "There's a charity gala in 2 nights," he said. "The perfect opportunity to present my father's recovery publicly. Show strength, discourage further attempts." His eyes fixed on Ivy. "I want you there, close to him, but invisible. Staff uniform, server's badge. Keep him calm in the crowd." The next day blurred into preparation. Designers swept through with racks of suits for Giorgio, who endured fittings with quiet dignity. Security teams ran drills, mapping exits and sightlines. Ivy spent hours with Giorgio, teaching him breathing exercises for crowds, ways to ground himself when the noise grew too much. 4 counts in, she demonstrated, holding his weathered hands. 7 counts out, like kneading bread, steady, rhythmic. Giorgio's smile carried shadows, but also trust. "You make even breathing sound like baking." The night of the gala arrived clear and cold, stars sharp above the estate's motorcade. Ivy smoothed her simple black dress, the server's pin cool against her collar. They'd styled her hair severely back, making her nearly invisible among the actual staff. The venue glittered with old money and older power. Ivy stayed within arm's reach of Giorgio as Valerio worked the room, his smile arctic as he greeted donors and board members. She watched him play his role perfectly. The devoted son, the powerful heir, the gracious host. But she caught the way his eyes constantly tracked back to his father, measuring Giorgio's comfort level. When the orchestra struck up a waltz, the dance floor filled with jeweled gowns and black ties, Valerio appeared at Ivy's elbow, his hand extending with elegant inevitability. "One dance," he murmured. "The gossips are watching, and we need to look normal." His palm was warm against hers as he led her onto the floor. The chemistry between them crackled like static, impossible to ignore at this proximity. Cameras flashed as they turned slowly, his other hand proper but possessive at her waist. In the shadows by the service entrance, a valet pressed a finger to his cuff and whispered. But neither Ivy nor Valerio noticed, lost in their careful dance of pretense and attraction. Giorgio watched from his seat of honor, a knowing light in his tired eyes as his son and the woman who'd saved him moved together, neither quite willing to admit what was growing between them. The music swelled, diamonds sparkled, and somewhere in that glittering crowd, invisible threads of threat and protection wove tighter. Ivy felt the weight of watching eyes, the other guests wondering who she was, Valerio's security assessing threats, Giorgio seeing more than either of them wanted to acknowledge. But in that moment, with Valerio's steady guidance and the music wrapping around them, she allowed herself to simply move through space with him, two people finding unexpected grace in necessary proximity. The dance would end, the gala would close, dangers would resurface. But for these few turns across the floor, they existed in a bubble of their own making, where protection didn't have to mean isolation and strength didn't preclude tenderness. Valerio's thumb brushed her palm in a gesture too subtle to be caught by cameras, and Ivy wondered if he too felt the shift. Like planets altering course, like fortress walls developing hairline cracks, like winter gardens growing new life in the dark. Ivy slipped away from the dance floor, crystal water pitcher in hand. The weight felt reassuring, something simple and real to focus on after that charged moment with Valerio. Giorgio smiled warmly as she approached his table, but before she could pour, two sharp cracks split the air like thunder. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Screams pierced the elegant atmosphere as crystals shattered and champagne spilled across marble floors. Valerio materialized beside them, his movements precise and lethal. He shoved Ivy and Giorgio behind a heavy banquet table, flipping it sideways for cover. The white tablecloth pooled around them like surrender. "Stay down," he ordered, voice steel-edged. A bullet whizzed past, catching his shoulder. Blood bloomed dark against his suit jacket, but Valerio's expression never changed. He positioned himself between them and the threat, gun already drawn. Smoke bombs hissed through broken windows, filling the garden with ghostly tendrils. Security teams moved with military precision, herding terrified guests toward secure exits while returning fire. But something felt off about the attack. Too measured, too controlled. This wasn't about body count. "They're testing response times," Valerio muttered, echoing her thoughts. His eyes tracked movement through the smoke while keeping one hand on his father's shoulder. Giorgio remained calm, his breathing steady as he used Ivy's exercises. The assault ended as abruptly as it began. In the sudden quiet, Ivy could hear glass crunching under boots as security cleared the perimeter. Scorch marks marred the imported wallpaper, and the grand chandelier swayed gently, missing several crystals. An hour later, they huddled in Giorgio's suite at the estate. Valerio paced like a caged predator, ignoring the blood staining his shirt. "Sit down," Giorgio growled, his voice carrying unexpected authority. "Let them tend that wound." "It's nothing," Valerio waved off the hovering medic. Ivy stepped forward, medical kit in hand. "Either you let me clean it, or I'll do it while you sleep." "Your choice." Something flickered in Valerio's eyes. Surprise, maybe amusement. He sat with careful grace, shrugging out of his ruined jacket. Ivy worked efficiently, cleaning the graze with steady hands. The wound wasn't deep, but it needed closing. "This will sting," she warned, threading the curved needle. Valerio didn't flinch as she placed the first stitch, though she felt his muscles tense beneath her fingers. She worked in silence, aware of his heat, his controlled breathing, the way he watched her hands move across his skin. "You've done this before," he observed. "Kitchen accidents happen. Cheaper to learn basic medical care than visit the ER." She tied off the last stitch, satisfied with her work. "Try not to tear them." Giorgio had dozed off in his armchair, exhaustion finally winning. Valerio moved to the chair beside his father's bed, his vigilance undiminished despite his own fatigue. Ivy watched him fight sleep, his body gradually losing the battle. When his eyes finally closed, she draped a soft blanket over him. Even unconscious, his fists remained clenched, as if he could physically hold back threats through sheer will. The moonlight caught his face, softening the hard lines into something younger, almost vulnerable. Ivy retreated to her own room, mind replaying the evening's violence. Something felt wrong the moment she opened her door. Her clothes lay perfectly folded in their drawers. Too perfectly. The stack of cooking magazines on her nightstand had been straightened, spines aligned with military precision. Her jewelry box sat exactly 3 inches from the edge of the dresser when she always kept it pushed to the back. Someone had searched her room while they were gone, and they'd been skilled enough to almost hide their tracks. Almost. She stood in the doorway, skin prickling. The invasion felt more intimate than the shooting, this methodical violation of her space. Questions crowded her mind. What were they looking for? Who ordered the search? Did Valerio know? The estate hummed around her, security teams patrolling the grounds, medical staff checking on Giorgio, servants cleaning up the night's chaos. Somewhere below, Valerio slept in that chair, wounded but unbowed, while his father's chest rose and fell in the rhythm she'd taught him. Ivy moved through her room, touching nothing, cataloging every subtle difference. Her passport had been moved from the left side of the drawer to the right. Her phone charger cord had been coiled too neatly. Even her shoes had been arranged at perfect right angles. The search had been thorough, but purposeful, not random destruction or theft, but information gathering. They'd wanted to know who she was, what she might be hiding. The thought made her stomach clench. In this world of power and violence, trust was as dangerous as bullets. She sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly bone-tired. The evening replayed in her mind. The dance with Valerio, the shooting, his blood on her hands as she stitched his wound. Now this clinical invasion of her privacy. The contrast was dizzying. Outside her window, guards moved through the garden with practiced efficiency. Motion sensors blinked like artificial stars. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. The estate's security wrapped around her like a spider's web, and she wasn't sure if it was meant to keep threats out or keep her in. Dawn crept across Ivy's room as she knelt by her closet, carefully placing a single dark hair across the seam where door met frame. Her fingers trembled slightly as she positioned a sugar crystal on the edge of her dresser drawer. Invisible tests that would reveal any intrusion. The morning air carried voices from the back terrace. She moved closer to her window, keeping out of sight behind the heavy curtain. Keeping the girl close is essential. The voice was cultured, smooth as aged whiskey, but something in its tone made her skin crawl. She recognized Edaio Marchetti, Valerio's consigliere, speaking to someone she couldn't see. And if she becomes a liability? Another voice, lower, almost inaudible. Then we adapt accordingly. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. She waited until the voices faded before slipping from her room, mind racing. The corridor cameras would show who had searched her space, assuming she could access the footage. The security office sat at the end of the main hall, its reinforced door perpetually closed. Ivy approached the desk, only to be met with polite but firm denial. Restricted access, Miss Hart. Sorry. She nodded, retreating to the kitchen where she felt most in control. The familiar motions of baking centered her, measuring almonds, browning butter, folding delicate pastry. Within an hour, the kitchen filled with the rich scent of fresh almond tarts. These need taste testers, she announced, carrying a still warm platter to the security office. Consider it stress relief. The guard's professional detachment cracked at the sight of golden pastry. Maybe just one. Ivy perched on the edge of the desk, asking casual questions about the camera system while he savored the tart. Must be boring watching empty hallways all day. Sometimes. He tilted the monitor slightly, showing her the previous night's footage as he reached for another tart. Though last night was eventful enough. She watched the timestamps tick by until she spotted it. A cleaner entering her room during the gala, then 20 minutes later, a hooded figure slipping inside. Her chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. These are amazing, the guard said, brushing crumbs from his shirt. Family recipe. Ivy gathered the empty plate. Thanks for the company. Back in her room, she began a methodical search, checking every drawer and corner. When she knelt to examine her vanity, her fingers found something stuck to the underside. A small flash drive taped in place. Ice slid down her spine. She stared at the drive, its metallic surface reflecting the morning light. This was a plant, a carefully laid trap, and she was standing in its jaws. She found Valerio in his study, pale winter sunlight streaming through bulletproof windows. He looked up from a stack of papers, his shoulders still stiff from the bullet graze. Someone searched my room during the gala, she said without preamble, and I found this. She placed the drive on his desk. I think I'm being set up. Valerio's expression shifted from attentive to dangerous, a predator scenting blood. Before he could speak, the door opened. "Everything all right?" Ezio glided in, his smile practiced and cold. I couldn't help overhearing. "A situation has developed," Valerio said, his voice carefully neutral. "Then by all means," Ezio gestured to the computer. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Valerio inserted the drive into a secure terminal. Files populated the screen. Route maps marked in red, banking transactions, all linked to a phone number listed under Ivy's name. The evidence was perfectly arranged, a noose tied with expert precision. "How unfortunate," Ezio murmured. Guards appeared in the doorway, positioning themselves between Ivy and escape. Valerio's eyes were winter cold as he issued the order. "Seal her room! Full lockdown!" Ivy stood very still, aware of the trap closing, of Ezio's satisfied smile, of the way Valerio wouldn't quite meet her eyes. The morning sun continued to pour through the windows, indifferent to the betrayal unfolding in its light. The evidence glowed on the screen, a digital indictment. Banking numbers scrolled past, each transaction a carefully crafted lie. The route maps showed delivery points, dead drops, patterns that painted her as an informant. Someone had gone to considerable effort to create this fiction. She could feel Ezio watching her, his gaze heavy with false sympathy. The guards shifted their stance, hands near weapons, ready for anything. And Valerio studied the screen with an intensity that burned, as if he could extract truth from pixels by sheer force of will. The room felt too small, too close. Outside, birds sang in the winter garden, oblivious to the tension building within these walls. Somewhere in the house, Giorgio would be wondering why she hadn't brought his morning tea. The thought of him waiting made her heart ache. She watched Valerio's fingers move across the keyboard, each click echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. The files spread across the screen, a web of fabricated guilt. She wanted to scream that it wasn't real, that someone was playing them all, but the words stuck in her throat. Ezio's phone buzzed quietly. He checked it with practiced casualness, but Ivy caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes, another piece falling into place in someone's careful plan. The guards' radios crackled with confirmation that her room was sealed. Evidence collected, space contained, suspects secured. The machinery of suspicion ground forward with terrible efficiency. Through the window, she could see the winter garden where she'd watched Valerio box just days ago. The memory felt distant now, belonging to a different world, one where trust was still possible, where the warmth between them hadn't frozen into this Arctic suspicion. The anteroom's elegant furnishings felt like a mockery. Ivy sat straight-backed on a velvet chair, her hands folded in her lap, while Valerio paced with controlled energy. The morning light cast harsh shadows across his features. "Walk me through it again," he said, voice low and controlled. The softness hurt more than anger would have. "Every step." "I woke up at 5:30 yesterday," Ivy began, keeping her voice steady. "Started prepping the kitchen by 6. Marco from security can verify. He always gets the first coffee." She detailed each hour, each interaction, building a timeline of witnesses and kitchen logs. "The tarts," she continued. "I brought them to the security office at 2:15. Officer Chen ate them while showing me footage from which you accessed without authorization." Ezio cut in smoothly from his position by the window. "I was trying to understand who'd been in my room." Ivy met Valerio's gaze. "I went to you as soon as I found the drive." Valerio's fingers brushed the contract on the side table. 30 days, her signature next to his. His expression flickered between the man who'd trusted her with his father and the leader facing a security breach. "We can't risk further exposure," Ezio pressed. "The girl should be confined until we verify." "I want to see Giorgio," Ivy interrupted. "Please." Valerio studied her for a long moment. 2 guards present. "Fine." They escorted her to Giorgio's suite, where he sat in his favorite armchair, winter sun warming his shoulders. His eyes brightened when she entered. "Little Baker," he greeted her, then frowned at the guards. Ivy knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hand. "Someone's trying to make trouble," she said softly. Giorgio's fingers tightened on hers. "The old rot never left this house," he muttered. "It just learned to wear new clothes." His gaze drifted to the guards, then back to her face with clear meaning. They spoke of small things after that. His appetite, the weather, whether she'd make those almond cookies again. But understanding passed between them in squeeze of hands, in careful glances. Back in her room that evening, Ivy sat at the small writing desk, composing a note with steady hands. The words were simple: Delivery Bay, 3 a.m., bread drop. She detailed the route through service corridors, past the kitchen's loading dock where suppliers made pre-dawn deliveries. She slipped the note into Georgia's prayer book during evening check-in, tucked between pages marked with a ribbon. Not hiding it exactly, leaving it for Valerio to find, to understand she wasn't running from them but drawing out whoever wanted her gone. The hours crawled. Ivy lay fully dressed on her bed, watching shadows slide across the ceiling. At 2:45 a.m., she eased her door open. The night guards patrolled on schedule, their footsteps echoing in precise intervals. The service corridors were darker, lit only by exit signs that cast everything in red. Her soft shoes made no sound on the tile. Through the kitchen, past industrial mixers, throwing strange shadows. The loading bay door was propped open an inch, standard procedure for the bread delivery. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she eased through the gap. Cool night air kissed her face. The delivery truck was backing up to the dock, reverse lights painting everything stark white. A van appeared silently on the service road, rolling to a stop beside her. Before she could move, the side door slid open. Hands grabbed her arms, dragged her inside. A hood descended over her face. The van accelerated smoothly away as the estate's klaxons began to wail, too late to matter. Through the fabric over her face, Ivy could smell leather seats and gunmetal. Someone's cologne. Expensive? Familiar. They took turns fast but controlled. Professional drivers who knew how to avoid attention. Ivy counted seconds, mapped their route in her head. Left at the main road, right at the highway entrance, north toward the lake. No one spoke. The only sounds were engine hum and her own carefully measured breathing. The hood was thick, but she could sense at least 4 others in the van with her. Their silence felt expectant, like actors waiting for their cue. The vehicle slowed, made a series of turns. Gravel crunched under the tires. They were leaving main roads, heading somewhere private, somewhere prepared. Ivy's hands were free. They hadn't bothered restraining her. Either they were overconfident or they wanted her to appear to have gone willingly. Both possibilities were useful information. She thought of Giorgio's knowing look, of Valerio finding her note, of the careful trap she'd walked into, hoping to spring a larger one. The van continued into the night, carrying her toward whatever came next. The hood still covered her face, but she kept her breathing steady, her posture relaxed. Let them think she was afraid or resigned. Let them underestimate her while she counted turns, mapped their route, gathered every detail she could. Through the fabric, she caught fragments of the world passing. Headlights, street lamps, the glow of dawn touching the horizon. The van maintained its smooth, unhurried pace. They had a destination in mind, somewhere they felt secure enough to take their time reaching. The gravel under the tires changed to packed dirt. They were far from the main roads now, following some private drive. The air felt different, thicker with lake moisture, heavy with pine. Ivy filed away each sensation, each clue to where they were taking her. The van slowed again, turning onto what felt like a narrower path. Tree branches scratched against the sides of the vehicle. They were nearing their destination, wherever it was. Ivy straightened slightly, preparing herself for whatever came next. Cold metal bit into Ivy's back through her thin blouse. Her wrists burned against nylon ties, shoulders aching from being wrenched behind the metal chair. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady metronome marking time. A red light blinked in the corner, a camera mounted on a tripod, its lens reflecting what little light filtered through the boarded windows. The warehouse smelled of creosote and damp concrete, decades of industrial grime ground into every surface. Comfortable? Conrad Voss stepped into frame, his leather shoes clicking on concrete. Everything about him was precise. His slate gray suit, his manicured hands, the calculated warmth of his smile. I do apologize for the accommodations. So difficult to find proper meeting spaces these days. He adjusted his cuffs, a habit that seemed more reflex than nerves. You see, loyalty is a fascinating currency. The right people will pay anything for it. His accent clipped the edges of words. And our friend Ezio has been quite the generous banker. The camera's eye swung toward Ivy as Voss set a phone on a nearby crate, its screen displaying a countdown. Simple terms, the routes and account numbers from that flash drive in exchange for your continued breathing privileges. He tapped the screen. You have 30 minutes before my colleagues become creative. Ivy kept her expression neutral while cataloging details. The drip came from exposed pipes near the ceiling. Through gaps in the wooden boards, purple neon flickered. Letters she couldn't quite make out, but the color suggested a liquor store or bar sign. The guard by the door shifted his weight every 90 seconds, like clockwork. Nothing to say? Voss raised an eyebrow. The quiet ones are always interesting. They tend to notice things others miss. I wonder what you've noticed about the Moretti household. Across town, Valerio's phone lit up with an incoming video feed. The audio lagged half a second behind the image, Ivy bound to a chair, Voss's smug face filling the frame. Giorgio hobbled closer to the screen, eyes fixed on the background. That neon? Giorgio's finger trembled as he pointed. Purple sign, Old North District, Tony's package store. We used to... He swallowed hard. The warehouse district, 2 blocks east, corner of Marshall and 12th. Valerio was already moving, barking orders into his phone. His network activated like a living thing. Enforcers hitting the streets, money changing hands, favors called in. Mid-level captains flipped under pressure, giving up safe houses and bolt holes. Voss's lookouts scattered like roaches in sunlight. Sir! One of Valerio's lieutenants appeared in the doorway. 3 possibles within 4 blocks of the liquor store, 2 abandoned textile warehouses and an old paint factory. Check them all. Valerio's voice was ice. Now! In the warehouse, Ivy worked steadily at the chair's bolts. The metal sliver from her shoe buckle was thin but strong, and the ancient screws were losing their grip in rotted wood. She kept her movements subtle, hidden by small shifts that looked like discomfort. The guard checked his phone, bored. Voss paced with theatrical patience, occasionally glancing at the countdown. 22 minutes left. You know what fascinates me? Voss mused. How quickly loyalty shifts. Take Ezio, decades of faithful service to the Moretti family. Then one day, he realizes his protege has surpassed him, inherited everything he worked for. He smiled thinly. Amazing how betrayal can feel like justice when you frame it properly. Ivy's wrists were raw, but the left chair arm had nearly a centimeter of play now. She kept working, letting Voss's monologue wash over her. The neon sign flickered again. She could almost make out letters now. An N, maybe a Y. 19 minutes. The guard's radio crackled, static and fragments of words. His expression tightened as he stepped into the shadows to respond. Voss's pacing quickened slightly. Complications! Ivy kept her voice mild, watching his reaction. Nothing significant. But his hand twitched toward his phone. The bolt gave another quarter turn. The neon flashed, and this time Ivy caught more letters. Tony's. She bit back a smile, remembering Giorgio's stories about the old neighborhood bars. 16 minutes. Tires hissed on wet pavement outside. Not close, but approaching. Multiple vehicles moving with purpose. Heavy boots on gravel spreading. Out with military precision. The guard's radio crackled again, more urgently. Voss's calm slipped for just a moment. He checked the countdown, then his own phone. The guard moved to the window, peering through a gap in the boards. 14 minutes? Ivy felt the last threads of the bolt give way. She kept her arms in position, waiting. More vehicles outside, engines cutting off, boots on metal stairs. The guard's radio went silent. 12 minutes. The countdown blinked steadily on the crate. Through the boards, Tony's neon sign pulsed like a heartbeat. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell, heavy, determined steps moving upward with inexorable purpose. 10 minutes left on the clock, but Ivy knew the real timer was measured in heartbeats now. She held herself still, waiting for the right moment. The guard's gun hand tightened. Voss straightened his already perfect tie. The footsteps grew closer, multiple sets now, spreading out on the landing. Metal groaned as someone tested a door down the hall. The guard moved to flank the entrance, weapon raised. 8 minutes showed on the countdown, but the real clock was running much faster now, marking time in breaths and boot steps as Valerio's men closed in. Ivy kept her eyes on the door, muscles coiled, ready. 7 minutes. The steps reached their floor. A shadow passed beneath the door. The guard's finger tightened on his trigger. 6 minutes remaining when the first impact rattled the doorframe. The hinges groaned. Voss's polished facade cracked just slightly. Another impact shook dust from the ceiling. 5 minutes. The door shuddered in its frame. The guard steadied his stance. Evie felt her pulse in her throat, counting down with the timer as heavy boots gathered outside. The rescue exploded like a thunderclap. The side door blew inward with a deafening crack, and thick smoke rolled across the floor. Through the haze, Valerio moved like a shadow, given purpose, his movements precise and lethal. 2 guards dropped before they could raise their weapons. The first took a shot to the knee, crumpling with a cry. The second barely managed to clear his holster before Valerio's bullet found his shoulder. Both weapons skittered across the concrete floor. Ivy. Just her name, just once. But the weight of fear and fury in his voice made her breath catch. She tracked his progress through the smoke by the muted sounds of impact. Another guard going down, a grunt of pain, boots scraping concrete. Then he was there, solid and real, his knife already moving toward her restraints. The timer beeped its final countdown as Ivy used her loosened bonds to twist away from the chair. Valerio's blade made quick work of the remaining ties, his touch careful despite the violence surrounding them. His other hand stayed on his weapon, covering the room. The moment she was upright, Valerio pivoted to face Voss, who had backed toward the window. The rival boss held his pistol in an increasingly unsteady grip, his polished facade cracking as his plans unraveled. Valerio didn't hesitate. His shot cracked through the warehouse, and Voss stumbled back with a bloom of red spreading across his right shoulder. The gun clattered from his nerveless fingers. "Symmetry," Valerio said coldly. "For the shot at the gala." Sirens wailed in the distance, their sound drifting through the broken windows. Ivy caught the acrid scent of smoke, not from their breach, but from somewhere deeper in the district. "Diversionary fire," one of Valerio's men reported. 3 blocks east. Emergency services are occupied. Valerio nodded, then pulled out his phone. "Time to hear from our friend." He played a recording, and a nervous voice filled the space. "Ezio arranged everything. The gala attack was staged, just enough chaos to make it look real. He planted the drive in the girls' room himself, had me doctor the transfers. Voss provided the warehouse and men, promised Ezio control of the territory once the Moretti heir was removed." Ivy's stomach clenched at the clinical betrayal in those words. Valerio's expression had gone winter cold, the kind of rage that burned so hot it circled back to ice. He turned to her, jaw tight with contained violence. "Your call," he said softly. "Their lives are in your hands. Choose." Ivy looked at Voss, bleeding but conscious, at the guards groaning on the floor. She thought of Giorgio, who'd lost years to violence, and of the endless cycle of revenge that had brought them here. "Life," she said firmly. "But with conditions. They face the Moretti Council. Everything gets documented. Evidence, testimonies, all of it. Your captains swear to the truth under oath." She met his gaze steadily. "We do this right, not in blood and shadows." Something shifted in Valerio's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "You heard her," he called to his men. "Secure them carefully." The warehouse transformed into ordered chaos as Valerio's team moved with practiced efficiency. Medics appeared to stabilize Voss and the guards. Evidence was photographed and bagged. Statements were taken and recorded. Through it all, Valerio kept one hand on Ivy's lower back, as if afraid she might disappear again. His touch was light but constant, grounding them both. When everything was secured, they walked to the waiting SUV. The pre-dawn air was sharp with smoke and possibility. Ivy's legs felt suddenly weak as the adrenaline began to fade. Valerio helped her into the back seat, then slid in beside her. As the car pulled away from the warehouse, he pressed his forehead to hers, sharing breath for a moment. The car's speaker crackled. "Ivy?" Giorgio's voice was rough with worry. "Are you there?" "I'm here," she assured him. "I'm okay." "Thank God." The old man's relief was palpable even through the connection. "Thank God." Valerio's hand found hers in the darkness of the car, fingers interlacing. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The weight of what they'd survived, what they'd chosen, settled around them like a blanket as the city slid past the windows. Dawn was breaking over the lake, painting the sky in bands of pearl and gold. The warehouse district fell away behind them, its shadows unable to follow into the growing light. Ivy watched the colors change, feeling Valerio's thumb trace slow circles on her palm. Giorgio kept talking softly through the speaker, his words a gentle stream of gratitude and concern. The familiar rasp of his voice filled the car's interior, a reminder of why all of this mattered. Family, loyalty, the choice to break cycles instead of perpetuating them. The SUV turned onto the private road leading to the estate, tires crunching on gravel. Security teams flanked their approach, a visible reminder of the protection surrounding them. Ahead, the house waited, its windows warm with welcome. Ivy felt Valerio's grip tighten slightly as they approached home. She squeezed back, acknowledging everything unspoken between them, the fear, the trust, the future stretching out before them like the rising sun. The Moretti Council chamber gleamed with old money and older power. Dark wood panels absorbed whispers, while crystal chandeliers cast stern shadows across the faces of arriving captains. At the center of it all, Giorgio Moretti sat straight-backed in his chair, his eyes clear and steady for the first time in years. Ivy watched from her position near the wall as Valerio commanded the room without raising his voice. He moved like a contained storm, presenting evidence with precise gestures that made each revelation land like thunder. The routes on the flash drive, he explained, projecting documents onto the screen, were compiled from data Ezio sold to competitors between 2018 and 2020. His finger traced a pattern of timestamps. Note the degraded quality of older segments consistent with multiple transfers. The captains leaned forward, their attention sharp. Some took notes, others simply watched with the intensity of predators scenting blood. A tech specialist stepped forward, highlighting discrepancies in the forged transfers. The account numbers linked to Ms. Hart were created last month, backdated, using compromised banking software. We've traced the access points directly to Ezio's private terminal. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Ezio, standing between armed guards, maintained his politician's smile even as sweat beaded at his temples. The evidence mounted. Recorded conversations between Ezio and Voss's lieutenants, surveillance footage of their meetings, testimony from the cleaner who planted the drive. Each piece clicked into place like bullets being loaded into a chamber. When the final recording played, Ezio's voice discussing removal of the Moretti heir, Giorgio's hands tightened on his armrests until his knuckles went white. Judgment came swiftly, delivered in the old way. The captains voted with black and white stones dropped into a bronze bowl. The sound of each stone hitting metal echoed like a death knell. Ezio Marchetti, Valerio pronounced, you are stripped of all rank and privilege within this family. You will be escorted to our southern holdings, where you will face internal justice for your betrayals. His voice carried the weight of generations. You chose poison over loyalty. Now you will taste it yourself. As guards led Ezio away, his smile finally cracked, revealing the terror beneath. Conrad Voss received his sentence next. Asset seizure, network dismantling, and a tribunal that would ensure he never rebuilt his power base. The formal proceedings concluded, but the day's work was far from over. Ivy guided Giorgio through the clinic wing, being established in his name, funded by the seized accounts. Natural light streamed through large windows, warming the fresh paint and new equipment. The intake area here, she explained, showing him the layout, and consultation rooms along this corridor. We'll have full-time medical staff, counselors, social workers, all trained to help without judgment. Giorgio's eyes were bright as he took it in. No strings attached? None, Ivy confirmed. No loyalty tests, no pressure to join the family. Just help for those who need it. They discussed logistics, the anonymous hotline, the street-level outreach program, the network of safe houses where people could heal without fear. Giorgio contributed ideas from his time on the streets, his hard-won wisdom shaping their approach. As afternoon faded into evening, Ivy made her way to the winter garden. Snow dusted the glass panels, but inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of growing things. She found Valerio there, just as she had that night weeks ago, when everything began to change. Her hand steady, she handed him the 30-day contract they'd signed what felt like a lifetime ago. Red ink marked her proposed amendments, turning temporary arrangement into permanent partnership. Valerio read each change carefully, his expression softening at the margins. When he looked up, something raw and wonderful lived in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple ring, platinum and sapphire, elegant without ostentation. Yes, Ivy said before he could speak. Yes to all of it. His hands were warm as he slid the ring onto her finger. I will love you, he promised, voice low and fierce, until the last star burns out. The family gathered in the dining room as night settled over the estate. Fresh brioche steamed in a basket at the center of the long table, its honey-sweet scent filling the air. Giorgio took his place at the head, shoulders straight, pride restored. Ivy sat beside him while Valerio moved around the table, pouring coffee with his own hands. A king serving his family. When he finally sat, the last empty chair was filled. Something old and haunted left the room, taking decades of pain with it. They passed bread and butter, talking softly about plans for the clinic, for the future they would build together. Outside, the city whispered about its devil king, but here in this warm room, Ivy saw only the man who had chosen love over vengeance, healing over harm. She watched him with his father, saw how gentle his hands could be when they weren't forced to fight. The night deepened around them, stars emerging in the winter sky. Security teams maintained their quiet vigilance while the house settled into peaceful rhythms. In the kitchen, staff prepared for tomorrow's breakfast. In the clinic wing, nurses arranged supplies for the first day of operations. And at the table, a family pieced itself back together, one shared meal at a time,